In the silent vastness of the sky, travelers place their trust in wings of metal that soar far above the earth. Airplanes carry millions of souls across oceans, continents, and clouds, and in every journey there is an unspoken contract that the craft will return safely to the ground. For most, this promise is kept without question. Flights ascend, glide, and descend, and their passengers step back onto solid soil unaware of the immense complexity that made their voyage possible. Yet, hidden within the history of aviation are stories of times when that promise has been broken, when something unexpected has turned a routine flight into a tragedy remembered by the world. These incidents, rare but unforgettable, are the moments where silence meets shock, and the mystery of what happened awaits an answer. The story of aviation is not only the story of triumph, technology, and human imagination reaching beyond the clouds. It is also the story of inquiry, investigation, and resilience in the face of loss. Behind the headlines of disasters, far from the initial shock felt by families and the public, there exists another world. It is the world of those who step into twisted metal, scattered wreckage, and difficult questions, determined not simply to assign blame but to find truth, because every truth discovered can become a shield against the next tragedy. They are aviation investigators, often called aviation detectives, and their work begins where an event ends. When an aircraft falls, the moments afterward form indelible images, debris scattered across fields, burning fragments lighting up the night sky, or silent fuselages resting in water, waiting below currents. For the outside observer, such scenes can feel like the closing page of a story, but for investigators, they mark the very first page of a long and meticulous narrative. To them, the broken wings and bent frameworks are not only signs of destruction, they are fragments of a language waiting to be read. They listen to the evidence and reconstruct the story, moment by moment, second by second, until an entire flight, from takeoff to collapse, is revealed again in clarity. In these early hours, when emotions run fierce and grief still bleeds raw, investigators must act with composure and patience. They approach their tasks not as figures of drama but as careful listeners, willing to let every wire, every panel of metal, every bolt speak. The way a piece of fuselage lies on the ground can whisper of forces that tore it apart. The angle of an engine blade carries the echo of how fast it spun before the silence began. Even the smallest fragment can contain within it the secret of why the journey was cut short. To anyone else, wreckage may seem like meaningless shards, but to these quiet detectives, it is an archive waiting to be opened. Their work is not driven by sensational revelations. It is driven by patience, calculation, and respect for both the science of flight and the lives that were lost. In a time of public speculation, when theories race across headlines and people demand immediate answers, investigators begin with something very different: observation. They take in the landscape, the spread of debris, the smell of burned materials, the distance between scattered parts. Measuring, photographing, recording, they capture a frozen moment of chaos that will later guide them to understanding. Their pace is slow, their gaze steady, because a single overlooked detail may hold the key to the truth. Aviation investigation is not about the drama of accusation. It is about listening to silence until it speaks. It is about following the trail of evidence even when that trail is hidden in smoke. It is about piecing back together what was broken, not to relive the tragedy but to ensure that lessons are learned from loss. In this sense, investigators embody the most important principle of aviation safety: every accident must leave behind more than grief, it must leave behind knowledge that protects lives in the future. And so, as investigators kneel on fields, study burns, trace the arc of bent metal, they are not working for the past. They are working for the flights that have not yet taken off. Part of the intrigue around aviation detectives lies in how carefully they balance science with intuition. Airplanes are machines filled with complexity, hydraulics, engines, sensors, instruments, digital systems weaving countless layers of precision. When catastrophe occurs, separating what failed from what survived becomes an art. A wire burned through in fire could be both a victim and a cause. An instrument that froze could be the trigger, or could simply be evidence that froze afterward. Detectives treat nothing as incidental, and yet they also consider everything within wider context. They must imagine themselves inside that flight, the list of pressures, the decisions, the signals echoing across the cockpit. Their purpose is to see both from the ground and from the air, from the outside world and from within the skin of the aircraft itself. Passengers board planes every day without thinking of this hidden web of safety beneath them. They buckle seat belts, settle into seats, read magazines, close eyes. What they do not see are the years of lessons written by investigators before. Every reinforced cargo door, every re-engineered fuel tank, every new checklist whispered to pilots before takeoff, it is all born from past disasters decoded by aviation detectives. What may appear absent from their daily journeys is in fact invisibly present in every smooth landing. When the aircraft taxis down the runway and takes flight, passengers are protected by the knowledge distilled from tragedies that came before, turned into armor against the unpredictable. In telling the story of how aviation detectives solve air disasters, one begins not in desperation but in patience. This is not a tale of shock, though shock always precedes it. It is not a tale of fear, though fear often sparkles in headlines. It is a tale of human perseverance in service of truth, carried out in hangars, laboratories, and open fields. It is a tale of investigators tracing the fragments of pain to transform them into preventions, ensuring that in the sky above, each new journey has a better chance at ending safely than the one before. This documentary takes you behind the world stage, into the quiet, methodical realm of aviation investigation. Here, there is no rush, no racing heartbeat, only patience, curiosity, and commitment. Here, disasters are not the end of the story but the beginning of a deeper one. As you listen, you may find your own understanding of flight shifting. The airplane you imagine soaring above will no longer seem an untouchable mystery. It will appear instead as a creation safeguarded by generations of inquiry, and by the tireless work of unseen detectives who stand guard over the skies, reading truth from silence, and ensuring that air remains the safest medium in which humanity travels. And so we begin, with clear eyes and calm voices, stepping into a journey not into the heart of calamity but into the quiet determination of those who bring order back from chaos. Their story is one not of loss around which fear gathers, but of discovery through which trust is kept alive. This is how aviation investigators solve air disasters. Through fragments, through silence, through time, they transform mystery into knowledge, and knowledge into safety. Their work is the bridge between the shattered moments of the past and the hopeful takeoffs of the future. In the first glimmers of dawn, when the sky returns from darkness and soft light falls across a landscape changed forever, the work continues with a rhythm that ignores the border between day and night. An aviation disaster does not recognize business hours, and so neither do those who are called to unravel its mysteries. Investigators move quietly across fields or shorelines, across scorched hillsides or even cold stretches of ocean where waves still carry fragments of what once held life. To the outside world the scene may look static, frozen in the aftermath of catastrophe, but to the experienced eye, every moment counts and every detail becomes a potential thread that leads toward truth. The approach to a crash site is governed by discipline. The first steps taken are careful, not only out of respect for what has happened, but also because the ground itself is evidence. Investigators walk slowly, marking points, measuring distances, noting how far fragments traveled from the fuselage. Each object's position is catalogued, documented in photographs, written in precise records. The pattern created by debris speaks with its own logic, and though it may appear random, it is the record of forces acting on the aircraft in its final moments. Pieces flung outward in a wide arc may indicate an explosion or breakup in midair, while a tightly clustered wreckage might suggest an impact largely intact. The Earth becomes a canvas, scattered with signs that only patience can interpret. The first impressions carry significance, yet investigators know to resist early conclusions, because the story of a flight can never be captured in a single glance. What lies at the surface often conceals layers beneath, and the truth requires peeling back assumptions. Trained to see the ordinary in extraordinary ways, they notice the angle of torn metal, the way rivets snapped, the discoloration of surfaces where heat left its mark. A simple scratch across a polished panel could reveal vibrations endured in the final minutes. A seatbelt locked tight may tell of passengers prepared for what they sensed, while a seatbelt unfastened may remind investigators that chaos was sudden, leaving no time for reaction. Even the smallest traces are treated as words in a larger testimony. Behind the stillness there is often the hum of machines brought in to aid the process. Cranes lift heavier sections from treacherous terrain, while drones skim across wide accident zones, capturing images in patterns the human eye alone cannot manage. Yet technology never overshadows instinct and human observation. Investigators walk slowly, letting their steps cover what machines cannot feel. They crouch low over a fragment, tilt it under sunlight, smell the sharp tang that burning plastic leaves long after flames extinguish. Through these senses, human intuition complements scientific instruments, ensuring that nothing escapes notice. The crash site itself is only the opening chapter. Once debris has been mapped, tagged, and secured, pieces are carefully shifted to hangars or warehouses where they will be reconstructed like a massive three-dimensional puzzle. Rows of twisted beams are aligned, wings reshaped to trace their original span, fuselage sections pieced together until the ghost of the aircraft stands once more, silent yet telling. This reconstruction is not done to create a dramatic image but to allow investigators to walk around the skeleton of the plane, to study where stresses aligned, where fractures began, and where systems failed. Every bolt replaced in its original position carries a clue. Every pipe realigned becomes a sentence in the unfolding story of what happened. The heart of the investigation, however, often beats within two small devices buried in the wreckage, devices known to the wider public as black boxes, though in truth they shine in bright orange for visibility. These recorders are designed to survive fire, pressure, and impact beyond imagination, their sole purpose being to carry the voices and the data of a flight across the boundary between life and catastrophe. One holds the voices of the cockpit minutes, sometimes hours, of conversation, silence, alarms, and background sounds that capture the very atmosphere of the journey. The other, the flight data recorder, contains streams of measurements, thousands upon thousands of parameters tracing altitude, speed, pressure, and control input second by second. Recovering these boxes requires persistence. If a crash occurs on land, they may be hidden deep within wreckage, their signal beacons guiding search teams who sift through mangled compartments. If the disaster unfolds at sea, search ships scan with sonar, and divers enter cold depths where darkness reigns, guided by the faint pings emitted until the batteries fade. The moment an investigator lays hands upon one of these battered but resilient containers, there is a sense of reverence, for within lies the possibility of hearing the final chapter of flight written in undeniable data. Once brought back to specialized laboratories, the careful work of decoding begins. Measuring instruments, playback equipment, and computer systems help extract every line of information, but here again patience rules. Voices from the cockpit may be transcribed word by word, every faint noise catalogued, the beep of a warning system, the strain in a pilot's breathing, a sudden silence after mechanical roars. Data streams form graphs that chart the life of the aircraft, revealing sharp drops in altitude, moments of unusual vibration, signals of engine spooling up or down. These are not just numbers or sounds, they are the pulse of a flight replayed after its silence. Through this process, the lives of the pilots come into sharper focus. Investigators study their training, their rest cycles, their decisions made under stress. Fatigue, confusion, or misunderstanding may emerge as threads within the tapestry of events. Yet investigators resist easy judgment, for they know that people caught in crisis rarely enjoy the clarity of hindsight. Instead, they seek to understand the environment in which choices were made, the alarms sounding, the turbulence shaking, the conflicting signals flashing across frantic instruments. Their work is not to condemn but to explain, so that future crews have clearer paths through uncertainty. The environment itself also becomes a suspect. Weather records are gathered: winds, storms, icing, lightning. Air traffic control tapes are replayed, revealing instructions and responses in the moments before disaster. Radar plots show the path traced across the sky, sometimes revealing unexpected maneuvers made under sudden duress. Investigators compare these external conditions with the inner performance of the aircraft, seeking to see whether nature overwhelmed technology, or whether technology failed against forces it was expected to withstand. In this dance between machine and sky, causes begin to appear with sharper definition. The investigation becomes a collage of disciplines. Metallurgists analyze cracks with microscopes, searching for signs of weakness, fatigue, or sudden overload. Chemists examine residues for evidence of fuel leaks or fire accelerants. Engineers study the design of systems to see whether flaws in construction contributed quietly to catastrophe. Psychologists contribute perspectives on human decision-making, while meteorologists reconstruct the layers of atmosphere through which the plane descended. Piece by piece, what first looked like chaos begins to align into order, as if a puzzle with missing edges gradually reveals its central image. Yet even when a likely cause emerges, investigators hesitate before final conclusions. They refine their evidence, test hypotheses, and recreate conditions where possible. In simulators, pilots replay scenarios exactly as data indicates, trying to feel the pressures and timing of what unfolded. In laboratories, components are tested until they fail, proving or disproving theories. This rigor ensures that when a final statement is made, it carries weight not of conjecture but of confirmation. It is through this meticulous patience that aviation earns its reputation as the safest form of travel, because lessons are not left to chance. Time stretches differently for investigators. While the world waits impatiently, headlines demand instant results, and families live between grief and unanswered questions, investigators sink into months, sometimes years, of quiet persistence. Reports may span hundreds of pages, each diagram precisely designed, each conclusion supported by layers of analysis. When eventually published, these reports offer not just answers but recommendations, changes to training, innovations in technology, redesigns of procedures. From tragedy rises evolution, shaping not memory of loss alone but a pathway towards safer skies. The public rarely sees the full magnitude of this work, yet its results lie hidden in every flight today. The reinforced cockpit doors that stand against intrusion, the rules that require multiple pilots awake and alert, the alerts that sound earlier for potential stall, all these come from pain transformed into protection. Every seat fastened more securely, every checklist revised, carries the signature of a past investigation. And while passengers rarely reflect on the invisible guardianship surrounding them, investigators know their work endures in silence like a protective veil stretched across the heavens. For those who dwell within this vocation, there is an enduring understanding that no accident is in vain if its lessons are learned. The dignity of those lost is honored not by mourning alone but by transforming their final flight into wisdom that may save others. This knowledge gives depth to the quiet focus seen at crash sites, the measured pace of men and women walking among wreckage. They are not there to sensationalize, nor to cast blame too quickly. They are there to listen to what remains, so that the sky may one day carry more certainty and fewer shadows. And thus, in the long hours of careful reconstruction, in the patient analysis of sounds and data, in the relentless pursuit of why, a new story rises from the ruins of the old. It is a story that promises tomorrow's flights will be safer than today's, just as today's are safer than yesterday's. The arc of aviation bends toward progress because at every point of failure, someone has walked into the silence and found the words hidden there. The detectives of the sky do not wear cloaks or masks, but through their persistence they embody the role of protectors. They investigate not for recognition but for the safety of millions who may never know their names. When we imagine planes lifting into clouds, banking gracefully under the sun, we imagine freedom, connection, and the miracle of bridging continents in hours. What we cannot see is the invisible tapestry woven from forgotten crashes, stitched together by investigators who refuse to let mystery remain unanswered. Every call sign transmitted to control towers, every final descent toward airport lights, every whisper of confidence passengers speak before sleeping in their seats all rest on this tapestry. It is made not from fabric, but from patience, loss, persistence, and discovery. Their work, often unseen, stretches like a luminous thread across the history of flight. From one accident to the next, from one investigation giving way to another, the story of aviation becomes less one of catastrophe and more one of learning. When viewed in this way, disasters are not the full stop of aviation's narrative but commas that pause, force reflection, and then give way to renewed movement forward. In this rhythm, safety grows and confidence remains, sustained by those who sit quietly with wreckage until it speaks its truth. The next time an aircraft ascends, rising on the strength of turbines and wings, its passengers will be surrounded by silence filled with knowledge. Knowledge that came from others who faced disaster. Knowledge earned from long nights and countless hours of investigation. Knowledge forged in sorrow but made into protection. This unseen guardianship is the inheritance passed from loss to life, from tragedy to travel. And as the work of investigators stretches onward, never ceasing, we can close our eyes, knowing that above us, across skies dotted with paths of light, every flight carries within it the weight of lessons learned, the strength of science, and the memory of persistence. The story we follow is one of progress shaped by patience, and of human dedication against the vast silence of the air. In the quiet that follows an accident, when the crash site has slowly been transformed from chaos into order, investigators turn their focus toward connections that are less visible. The debris may have been gathered, reconstructed, and recorded, but questions deepen rather than fade. Understanding an air disaster is never only about what happened at the scene. It is also about the unseen currents of human decision, technological design, and organizational structure that flowed beneath the surface long before the final moment of the flight. The search expands, stretching backward in time, tracing months or even years before the accident. What once looked like a single event begins to unfold into a chain that linked countless factors together until they converged in one place, on one day, in one tragic outcome. This progression is deliberate. Investigators have no interest in easy narratives, because aviation does not allow for simple answers. An airplane is not just a machine, it is a living network of systems, crews, maintenance teams, manufacturers, and regulators. Each part functions dependently on the others, and so the examination must follow these threads wherever they lead. Engineers comb through maintenance logs, reading thousands of entries captured by mechanics who tended the aircraft between flights. These records speak with their own kind of life. A notation about an unusual vibration months earlier, a replaced part, a deferred repair all become potential echoes of a weakness that finally revealed itself in the disaster. Patterns of neglect or misunderstanding emerge slowly, discovered only under the patient eye of investigators who search as though assembling a mosaic from scattered stones. Flight crews too are examined, though always with care, dignity, and restraint. Pilots and co-pilots, though central to the fate of any flight, are rarely simple villains in the narrative of an accident. Their actions are typically the product of layered circumstances, signals interpreted under stress, controls that misled, or training that may not have been sufficient for unusual conditions. Investigators study their backgrounds, their hours, their simulator checks, their medical reports, even the subtle traces of fatigue left in sleep schedules. They listen again and again to a pilot's words from the cockpit voice recorder, not only hearing what is spoken but the tone, the pauses, the hesitation or confidence, the interruptions of alarms around them. These moments build a portrait not of individuals failing in isolation, but of humans caught in situations where the line between clarity and confusion narrowed to almost nothing. The larger environment cannot be ignored. Weather records are excavated like fossils, reconstructed from satellites, ground stations, and flight path data until a complete picture of the atmosphere is reassembled. Wind speeds at various altitudes, the precise layers of cloud, the ice crystals drifting unseen, all these factors become characters in the unfolding drama. In cases where storms towered across flight paths, investigators seek to understand whether conditions communicated to the flight crew matched the true danger above. Did the radar show what the pilots needed to know, or did the complexity of the storm hide pockets of turbulence too severe for prediction? In the chill silence of laboratories, meteorologists recreate these conditions with charts and simulations, reminding investigators that the sky is never neutral. One of the more difficult truths discovered through such painstaking efforts is that accidents rarely spring from a single mistake. They are almost always the result of chains with many links, each forged separately, sometimes years apart, only joining tragically at the moment of disaster. A small design flaw overlooked in testing, combined with insufficient instructions in a manual, combined with fatigue in a cockpit, combined with weather pushing at the limits when woven together, these threads form the rope that finally snaps. This understanding drives investigators not to blame individuals, but to reveal systemic weaknesses. In aviation, responsibility stretches outward into a web, ensuring that solutions are as comprehensive as the causes themselves. From within these investigations grows an atmosphere of humility. To observe the complexity of flight is to recognize how many things must go right, all at once, for a journey to end safely. Each bolt must hold, each system must function, each decision must align, each signal must be interpreted clearly. When failure occurs, it shows not the weakness of humans alone, nor of machines alone, but the delicate balance between the two. Investigators, in their solemn practice, acknowledge this balance, and it is this acknowledgement that allows them to look beyond pride or politics, focusing instead on truth that is useful, truth that prevents recurrence. Often, in these explorations, investigators find themselves confronting the voices of those who cannot answer back. Families left behind wait in silence, their pain deepened by uncertainty. Every pause in investigation is felt by them not as scientific patience but as prolonging of grief. Investigators carry this weight quietly, sometimes unseen, for they know that solving technical mysteries does not erase sorrow. Yet they also recognize that uncovering answers provides families a fragile but vital sense of closure. To tell a mother, a father, a child why the aircraft fell, to explain how their loved one's final moments arrived, is to give truth in place of emptiness. Even when the truth is painful, it carries dignity that speculation cannot grant. Beyond personal loss, there is the larger audience of the public who entrust their lives daily to aviation. For them, too, investigators perform their duty. Each passenger may never read the details of final reports, but they board aircraft safer because others once endured disaster. Recommendations flow outward from investigation rooms into manufacturing plants that redesign parts, into airlines that revamp training programs, into regulators who mandate new safety rules. The ripple from each investigation spreads across the entire globe, silent but profound, altering flights thousands of miles away from where the accident occurred. It is as though each lesson becomes a lantern, casting light across all skies, ensuring that mistakes are not repeated. The process of investigation, stretched across months or years, comes to embody a kind of meditation. Day after day, evidence is revisited. Simulations are rerun. Reports are drafted and revised. Experts convene, debate, challenge one another's interpretations, ensuring conclusions stand against scrutiny. Observers from other nations may join, because aviation is never bound by borders. Each flight crosses lands and oceans, and so investigations must embody the same universality. Cooperation becomes essential, and through that cooperation a quiet unity forms. It is a unity stitched not by politics but by shared determination to make the sky safer for all, regardless of nationality. One of the unseen beauties within this painstaking process is how tragedy births not only knowledge but solidarity. Investigators, engineers, pilots, regulators, even manufacturers sometimes set aside rivalries to work together, bound by the urgency of preventing recurrence. It is a fragile solidarity, born out of loss, but it leaves within aviation a rare sense of global responsibility. Unlike many human endeavors marked by division, the investigation of air disasters teaches unity through necessity, reminding the world that in the air above, humanity travels together. Such reflections deepen the story beyond technical detail. They invite listeners to see aviation not only as steel machines thrusting into the sky, but as an unfolding portrait of human hope and fallibility intertwined. Every crash site, however tragic, becomes a mirror reflecting back the complexity of progress, invention paired with imperfection, courage paired with vulnerability, knowledge paired with limitation. It is in confronting this duality that investigators bring meaning back from devastation. They demonstrate that safety advances not in leaps untouched by loss, but through slow steps carved painfully from it. Yet for all the science and data, there is also silence, a silence that hangs heavy in reconstruction hangars, in dimly lit offices where late-night teams analyze graphs, in the pauses between families' questions. Investigators live with this silence, not fearing it, but acknowledging it as part of their duty. Silence does not mean absence. It means respect, contemplation, and the patience of those who refuse to rush answers. In sitting with silence, investigators embody the very essence of their profession, waiting until evidence speaks clearly. And so, gradually, through silence and speech alike, through fragments and reconstructions, through the weaving together of countless threads, conclusions are formed. These conclusions do not erase what has happened, nor pretend to ease grief fully. But they transform mystery into explanation, and speculation into knowledge. In the slow bloom of understanding, memory of loss takes on a second life as a safeguard for others, as a foundation for future safety, as a quiet gift to those yet to fly. In the stillness of night, when aircraft lights move like constellations across black skies, few passengers think of this process. They rest, they sleep in their seats, or gaze out windows where pinpoints of distant towns drift below. Yet they are held not only by wings and engines, but by the invisible arms of investigation, wrapped around each flight in trust. They are carried by knowledge distilled from tragedies past, knowledge patiently gathered and crafted by investigators who settled into chaos and returned with clarity. Every smooth landing is, in a way, an unspoken memorial to flights that ended differently, and to the lessons learned from them. To understand this is to feel aviation itself differently. No longer merely a miracle of machinery, it becomes a human story, a story of scientists reading shattered wings as clues, of survivors turned guardians of the skies through their patience, of sorrow reshaped into protection. This is the rhythm hidden beneath takeoff and landing, the heartbeat beneath the calm announcements of flight attendants. It is knowledge carried invisibly, as present as the air flowing across wings at hundreds of miles per hour. At its heart, aviation investigation is not a tale of disaster alone. It is a tale of transformation, of finding meaning in loss, of an enduring human promise to safeguard journeys yet to come. The threads of this tale stretch back through decades of flight and forward into generations yet unborn. And while the roar of engines may drown out our awareness of it in daily life, those who listen carefully will recognize that above our heads, woven into the silence of the sky, is a tapestry of lessons bought with courage, loss, and relentless search for truth, lessons that ensure each new journey continues along safer currents than the last. In the days after a crash, when the clamor of headlines begins to dull, when the shock of breaking news is replaced by the slow rhythm of waiting, the quieter, less visible chapters of an investigation unfold. This is the part most of the world rarely sees, because the work no longer takes place in fields scattered with debris or on shorelines touched by wreckage. Instead, it happens behind walls, in laboratories, in windowless offices, in hangars where twisted fragments are laid out under fluorescent light. Here the noise of the public world fades away. What remains is concentration so deep and patient it begins to resemble meditation. The investigators step from the chaos of destruction into an arena of order, bending over evidence not for minutes but for months, and sometimes even years, letting each piece reveal what it still remembers. The reconstructions now take on new detail. Each fragment moved from the crash site is placed into its position, traced against diagrams and photographs taken before the crash. Panels are pieced together like broken ceramics, each crack examined under magnification to distinguish whether it tore outward from an explosion or inward from impact. Wires are categorized by color, stripped back carefully, their burned ends analyzed to determine whether electrical arcing began before the crash or after the ground was struck. Tiny screws and rivets, overlooked by most eyes, become subjects of intense focus. Their angles of breakage, their stretching or shear, are studied like fingerprints. In these minute patterns, investigators find entire chapters of the story unfolding. It is during this phase that the discipline of metallurgy, one of the more hidden but vital sciences, arrives at the center. Specialists bend low over microscopic images of fractured parts, searching for the telltale markings of fatigue cracks that may have grown unseen for years. Under electron microscopes, what appears as simple broken steel blooms into landscapes of ridges and valleys, striations etched into metal by stress repeating thousands of times during flight cycles. To the untrained, the images look like abstract art, but to investigators, they speak plainly. Here is where weakness began, here is where time conspired silently against strength until the final separation came. Nearby, in other labs, chemists run careful tests on residue scraped from burned sections of fuselage. The scent of jet fuel lingers, but chemistry demands more precision than simple smell. Through careful analysis, traces reveal whether the fire ignited before or after impact, whether accelerants perhaps from design failure or human interference played a role. Investigators remember that every chemical signature, every residue, carries testimony. If fragments are tested long enough, skies of dissolved smoke reveal truths hidden inside the smallest particles. The flight data, recovered earlier and extracted from the recorders, enters months of analysis. Endless streams of numbers march across screens: altitude, thrust, temperature, hydraulic pressures, control inputs. These data are translated into graphs, then reassembled into simulations. Computers recreate the flight second by second, allowing investigators to watch digital aircraft respond exactly as its real counterpart did. Even here, where charts glow upon screens, investigators speak softly, as if not to disturb the fragile replay of moments before disaster. Their task is to notice not only the obvious, the sudden drop in altitude, the erratic surge in airspeed, but the smaller tremors that began earlier, a temperature rising unusually, your control twitching long before alarms sounded. These are the whispered precursors, and if they are heard clearly enough, they explain what followed. The cockpit voice recordings undergo repeated listening, so many times that investigators can anticipate every word before it comes. They note the sound of switches, the clicking of levers, the subtle change in background hum when engine power shifts. Even breaths are analyzed, because a pilot's breathing faltering in a moment of stress tells its own story. There is a strange intimacy in listening closely to voices of those no longer alive, hearing them speak casually in some moments, then grapple with confusion in others. Investigators treat this intimacy with reverence, transcripts captured formally, emotions kept steady, because their purpose is not to sensationalize but to ensure every note contributes to a clear understanding. As technical findings grow, investigators balance them with layers of human factors. They consult with specialists in psychology to interpret pilot decision-making. Why did crew members respond a certain way to alarms? Did training prepare them adequately for the situation they faced? Were checklists designed to support clarity under pressure, or did they instead overwhelm with information without clear guidance? These questions expand the scope beyond one cockpit into the training systems that shape pilots worldwide, because if flaws exist there, they ripple as potential dangers across thousands of flights carrying millions of souls. The investigation also reaches back into the manufacturer's records. Teams travel to factories, opening archives of blueprints, test results, and certification processes. They examine the history of the aircraft model itself. Has it faced issues before, in smaller incidents less catastrophic but perhaps precursors? Patterns often reveal themselves: a hydraulic design adjusted poorly, a flight control software bug corrected once but incompletely, a piece of wiring repeatedly prone to wear. Each pattern becomes a red flag illuminated by the wreckage of the flight under examination. The goal here is always larger than one accident. It is to prevent flaws from compounding and resurfacing in countless aircraft still flying across the globe. During this stage, the daily life of investigators grows routine but remains intense. Mornings begin with reports, discussions of progress, planning of next steps. Days pass in laboratories where detail consumes hours, fragments handled with gloved precision, microscopes adjusted again and again. Nights may fade into early mornings, as simulations are rerun, as drafts of reports expand slowly page by page. Outside these rooms, the world continues with ordinary rhythm, but investigators surrender to a different clock, one measured in patient discoveries instead of hours. The weight is heavy, yet they stay present because they sense every clue they uncover may one day save another life in another time and place. For many investigators, this work is more than technical. It becomes a calling sustained by a quiet sense of duty. They know passengers will never thank them directly, and families may never know their names. There will be no applause for nights spent listening to cockpit recordings or weeks spent over fragments of twisted steel. Yet within them endures a trust that what they do matters profoundly. To them, the rows of wreckage inside hangars are not lifeless. They are guardians of lessons, waiting patiently for someone to listen deeply enough to hear. And as long as investigators exist, those lessons are given voice. The world sees only the final report, the summary made of pages and diagrams. But behind each of those words lies years of effort, of fragments examined, of systems debated among teams of experts, of hypotheses tested and tested again. When the report emerges, it states calmly, the cause was this sequence, beginning here, culminating there. It lists contributing factors. It offers recommendations. To casual readers it may appear dry, technical. But in truth it is the distillation of countless lives of work, squeezed into clarity that regulators, manufacturers, and airlines can act upon without delay. That dryness is itself a measure of respect, a shield against drama that clouds precision. And so time passes in this rhythm, until the pieces of each accident finally fit together, until conclusions are confirmed, until recommendations are made. Yet even then, the story is not finished. The translation of recommendations into changes lingers beyond the report. Regulators review, agencies enforce, manufacturers adjust designs, airlines alter procedures. Training is changed, manuals are rewritten, rules are amended. Slowly, silently, the legacy of disaster shapes the safety of future skies. And passengers board flights in airports across the world, never knowing the adjustments guiding their safety were purchased with sorrow years before. In this way, the everyday work of investigators stretches endlessly into the horizon. They exist always in the space between tragedy and prevention, carrying one into the other. From loss, they carve safety. From silence, they find voices. From fragments, they build clarity. This is their continuum, and though the outside world looks away after headlines fade, they remain, working patiently through cycles of evidence, analysis, conclusion, recommendation. As daylight ends and nights stretch long, their hangars still glow with light. Pieces of old accidents line the walls, not out of morbid fascination, but as persistent reminders of why the work continues. Each twisted spar, each burned circuit board, stands as both memory and teacher. Investigators, walking among them, feel the weight not only of responsibility but of continuity, of being part of a lineage that stretches across decades of aviation. Others walked here before them, others will continue after them, and together they form a thread that holds the skies in safety. And for those who listen, who close their eyes and follow this story, there comes an awareness deeper than fear. Fear imagines flights falling from skies without reason. Awareness recognizes that even when disaster strikes, reason is always found, and lessons are drawn that bend the future toward safety. In this awareness, the sound of an engine at cruising altitude no longer carries only fragility. It carries also the echo of investigators' quiet promises, woven back into the wind, that no accident passes without a response, that no loss is ignored, and that behind every flight, there is always a community working, searching, listening, ensuring that the sky remains one of the safest places humans will ever travel. In the months that follow a completed investigation, when the official report is published and the findings are released to the world, the narrative of aviation disasters enters its most transformative stage. For investigators, the reconstruction of fractured wings and the decoding of data may be finished, but what remains is perhaps the most important task of all: the translation of knowledge into prevention. Truth, no matter how patiently discovered, is only half a victory if it does not reshape the future. And so, the conclusions drawn from broken fragments must now ripple outward, carried into training sessions, engineering labs, policy rooms, and airline procedures that will touch every corner of the aviation world. To those who live within the rhythm of these processes, the work never feels like closure. It feels like continuation, the unbroken passage from tragedy into aviation safety's next evolution. It begins with recommendations carefully written, openly shared, meticulously justified. These are not casual suggestions but guiding lanterns drawn from the wreckage. Each recommendation takes the form of a safeguard, pointing toward a weakness that must be sealed, a vulnerability that must not be allowed to linger. If the investigation finds that confusion in cockpit warnings led to hesitation, then the recommendation echoes outward: redesign the interface, train pilots to interpret, update manuals. If the crash revealed design flaws in a mechanical system, then the recommendation becomes a push toward re-engineering, reshaping the very skeleton of future aircraft. Each recommendation operates both as command and remembrance, ensuring that the sacrifice of passengers lost will translate into safety for passengers yet to fly. Manufacturers of aircraft receive these reports not as distant observers but as essential participants. Their engineers gather around diagrams and conclusions much as investigators once gathered around wreckage. Here, in quiet boardrooms and expansive laboratories, they study what must change. It may involve redesigning systems, strengthening materials, altering layouts, rebuilding engines piece by piece until they resist the failures observed. Sometimes, these changes are subtle: an adjustment to circuitry, a reinforcement of joints, the rearrangement of warning lights. Other times, they are sweeping: a new aircraft born, replacing the architecture of an old one. What unites them all is their origin, recommendations carved from disaster, shaping safety before another tragedy emerges. Airlines too become recipients of these lessons. Training programs shift, syllabi reshaped around the realities revealed in investigations. Pilots are placed into simulators, not only to master normal flight but to face once more the same scenarios that led earlier crews into difficulty. In these simulators, alarms sound, turbulence strikes, instruments waver, recreating conditions so stressful that in reality they once bent minds to breaking. Yet here, in the careful rhythm of training, crews learn not to fear such moments but to adapt, to read signals clearly, to coordinate calmly. What was once the undoing of a flight becomes the foundation of resilience. If fatigue was discovered as a hidden culprit, schedules are altered, rest rules rewritten, cultural expectations within airlines challenged. Instructors remind new pilots that investigations are not distant stories. Each is a manual written in pain, meant to protect them in skies yet to come. Beyond pilots, training extends to cabin crews, ground staff, and controllers. Flight attendants learn anew the importance of recognizing early signs of smoke, of coordinating evacuations more efficiently, of mastering tools long unused but suddenly essential in moments of crisis. Air traffic controllers, studied in their own right after accidents, are provided upgrades to procedures and technologies to sharpen communication. Each sector within aviation embraces its recommendations, because every sector shares responsibility. The lesson is perpetual. The sky's safety is not one person's task but a collective guardianship spanning countless professions, each supporting the other invisibly while flights traverse the globe. Policymakers and regulators operate in the realms above these practical changes, codifying them into law so that every airline and manufacturer must comply. When a report highlights a vulnerability, international agencies deliberate, debate, and ultimately write new standards meant to bind the future. These decisions reach far, across oceans and borders, ensuring that the skies do not fragment into uneven safety. What is learned in one nation is applied worldwide, because flight itself knows no boundary. A passenger departing one country and landing in another deserves protection shaped by every lesson discovered anywhere on Earth. Through these global policies, the work of investigators transcends its origin, transforming into a universal shield draped across humanity's shared sky. This phase of aviation safety may appear dry to outsiders: meetings, manuals, paperwork, but within it lies deep poetry. Consider the trajectory. The voices once silenced in midair now return subtly as pages of regulations, as clauses in manuals, as new buttons glittering on dashboards. Their silent testimony endures in these changes. The tragedy that once brought sorrow alone now whispers into the future as safety. The gears of progress turn not because technology advanced spontaneously, but because investigators heard what wreckage whispered and carried its message into laws and procedures. Every procedural drill, every updated checklist, every redesigned cockpit panel is a memorial made not in stone but in living safety. And then, slowly, evidence of transformation appears in the air itself. Future flights encounter storms similar to the one that destroyed a predecessor aircraft, but this time, reinforced radar software reveals the warning sooner, guiding pilots around rather than through. Future crews confront mechanical difficulties mid-air, but simulators prepared them, and they navigate smoothly to landing. Fuel tanks exposed once to safety risks now hold firm, designed differently because one investigation decades before revealed vulnerabilities. Passengers fasten seatbelts, tuck blankets under their chins, fall asleep, unaware of the invisible protection surrounding them. Every improvement is silent. Planes do not carry plaques announcing which tragedies gave birth to which safety features. But the protection is there, woven invisibly into the simplest act of a safe landing. In this sense, investigations never fade. They become part of the DNA of aviation, each accident adding strands of knowledge to the spiral of safety. No detail is wasted. The smallest crack in a wing decades ago might be the reason a stronger wing today holds fast under stress. The misread alarm of a pilot 40 years past might be the reason a virtual assistant now speaks with clarity in cockpits across the world. The link between sorrow and safety is continuous and profound. To fly in the present is to fly on the shoulders of those who perished in the past, shielded by their unseen legacy. Investigators themselves understand this continuum more than anyone. They know that when they bend over wreckage, they are not simply solving puzzles isolated in time. They are writing syllables within aviation's evolving language of safety. They are carrying forward promises silently made to passengers that even if one journey was cut short, countless others will not be. This recognition fuels their endurance in long nights and endless days of analysis. It shapes the patience with which they face criticism, urgency, or misunderstanding from the public. They know their work is not immediate comfort. It is a planting of seeds, whose fruits will be harvested by flyers years, even decades later. What results is not the erasure of disaster but its transformation. Each tragedy becomes both scar and shield, both memory and mechanism. The scars remain in families, in communities, in memories of lives ended too soon. But the shields rise invisibly above airports, across skies. And the investigators walk this line constantly, their lives dedicated to ensuring that no scar exists that does not also produce a shield. To them, this balance is sacred, silently honoring every loss by ensuring protection flows from it. The rhythm of this transformation carries with it an almost spiritual quality, though it remains rooted in science and law. Invisible though it is, passengers live in the protection carved from countless investigations. This unseen guardianship stretches across continents, watching over aircraft rising into dawn skies, descending into evening glow, circling over oceans, weaving between clouds. Within each flight is the echo of all past voices, the shouts, the alarms, the silences turned into symbols of safety. Within each landing lies the culmination of decades of loss rewritten as preservation. And for those who choose to reflect, who lie back in reclining seats and peer at starlight through oval windows, there comes recognition of the profound depth beneath ordinary travel. While most look upon flying as a routine convenience, the narrative running silently beneath it is profound: lives lost, mysteries solved, recommendations enforced, changes enacted, millions protected. Every ticket printed, every gate boarded, every final taxi toward a runway is supported by an invisible cathedral of hard-won safety created not by one generation but by many. The architecture is vast, and yet most passengers never notice. It is meant not to be noticed. It is meant to be trusted. Still, behind this invisible cathedral, the investigators continue working, for their role never ends. As long as planes rise, as long as risks remain, their presence is essential. They stand at the quiet boundary between disaster and protection, ensuring that one always leads into the other. The world may not celebrate them, may not even recognize them, but their quiet labor endures as a bridge between sorrow and safety. And so, in every whisper of turbines spooling up, in every hum of engines cruising at 30,000 feet, there is the echo of their patient promise: nothing is forgotten, nothing is ignored, everything is carried forward into tomorrow. Thus, the cycle continues. Investigators listen where silence once was. Engineers respond to their findings. Airlines reshape training. Regulators strengthen rules. And passengers, unaware of their invisible guardianship, continue to travel across the clouds, rocked gently by engines, lulled by safety so solid it feels invisible. The world moves forward on these wings of resilience. And though passengers never hear their voices, each investigator lingers quietly in every safe landing, each epitaph written not in stone but in the whisper of rubber meeting runway in peace rather than tragedy. In the stillness that follows the wave of public attention, when newspapers have shifted to other headlines and television speaks less of the tragedy, the investigators remain. Their work does not end when the spotlight fades, nor does it diminish with time. Indeed, it deepens. For beyond the technical findings, beyond recommendations and changes enacted, lies another truth: investigations are not only exercises in science. They are journeys of the human spirit, journeys that demand patience, resilience, and the silent carrying of profound grief. In this realm, investigators themselves become not only analysts but quiet bearers of sorrow, men and women who live on the edge between mourning and duty, between compassion for what has been lost and commitment to what can yet be secured. Within each of them, whether spoken or unspoken, is the weight of countless lives encountered only through tragedy. They walk the crash sites where echoes of passengers linger in abandoned belongings. A child's toy half buried in dirt, a fragment of luggage tag fluttering in wind, a seat cushion stilled by silence, all these fragments remind investigators that their work is not abstract. It is achingly human. Every burned circuit or fractured spar carries the memory of someone who trusted that flight, someone who never came home. Though investigators train themselves to focus with clarity, they cannot ignore these reminders. Instead they absorb them, carrying an invisible weight that saturates every moment of their work. How do they endure this? The answer lies not in indifference but in a careful blending of empathy with detachment. Investigators allow themselves to feel the gravity of what they witness, but they also train their minds to shape grief into purpose. Compassion bursts forth when they meet families, when they look into eyes desperate for answers. Detachment builds when they face wreckage day after day, when they know that to drown in sorrow is to risk overlooking crucial details that could save lives. Their balance is delicate, practiced, imperfect, but it keeps them moving forward. This balance is one of the quiet miracles within aviation, sustaining the guardianship of safety through the most difficult investigations. The emotional lives of these detectives unfold in long, private rhythms. Many spend endless weeks traveling across crash sites and laboratories, separated from loved ones. They wake not in comfortable beds but in temporary rooms where walls are bare except for charts and notes pinned in quiet determination. Their companions are colleagues bound together by shared purpose, men and women who across years grow into families of another kind. Within these teams, laughter sometimes breaks through, fragile but real, because laughter in the midst of sorrow becomes survival. They share meals after long days, voices low but warm, replenishing one another for work that tomorrow will demand again. Fatigue is constant. Their bodies wear down under the weight of irregular hours spent between conferences and hangars, yet their minds persist in the search for answers. Even in moments of rest, their thoughts return to questions unresolved. Sleep does not come easily when voices from cockpit recordings echo in memory. And yet, they continue, because they are aware of the profound trust handed to them, the trust of families yearning for clarity, the trust of nations demanding transparency, the trust of future passengers who may never know they exist but who depend utterly upon their success. Such trust transforms fatigue into endurance, turns weariness into a kind of calling. There is also a spiritual quality in their patience, though it may not wear the symbols of formal religion. To sit with wreckage quietly, to wait weeks or months for a single fragment to reveal its story, requires a kind of devotion. Their practice becomes monk-like: repetition, observation, long hours spent in silence, a process of listening without rushing. In that silence, something profound stirs. Investigators learn that truth cannot be forced but must be discovered, as if revealed by the evidence itself. They cultivate reverence for silence, realizing it is never empty but filled with unspoken lessons waiting to emerge when the time is right. This meditative patience shapes them over years. Younger investigators, at first drawn by fascination for science or engineering, find themselves transformed into bearers of responsibility far deeper than technical work. They learn to slow the rhythm of their minds, to accept uncertainty without panic, to remain steady amid pressure. They begin to see their duty not only as solving accidents but as participating in a larger story of humanity's quest for safety. The sky itself comes to seem like their cathedral, endless and vast, filled with streams of aircraft, each depending on their dedication. They walk beneath it not idly, but with a sense of guardianship, humbled by its immensity. For many, the most difficult nights are those shared with survivors or families left behind. There are interviews where parents ask what their children's final seconds were like. There are conversations where spouses clutch photographs, searching for fragments of explanation. Investigators cannot offer comfort in the ordinary sense, for they cannot undo what has been done. But what they can offer is honesty. They speak gently, carefully, but directly, sharing what evidence reveals. For families, even painful truth is preferable to silence. Behind the calm tone of the investigator lies the weight of kindness in its most unusual form, the kindness of respecting sorrow enough to honor it with clarity. In boardrooms and public hearings, investigators present findings with precision, but behind their controlled delivery beats a heart deeply aware of what those findings mean. They know that every diagram shown, every sentence spoken, represents an end but also a new beginning. They find strength in the knowledge that even if the world forgets the names of the victims, the safety built from their tragedy will endure. Investigators rarely show emotion on such stages, but it is always present, coursing silently beneath the surface, shaping words spoken evenly, patiently, but with significance heavier than sound. The nature of this profession brings loneliness, too. Carrying grief that does not belong to them but that they nonetheless shoulder leaves quiet marks. Some investigators turn to journaling, recording feelings they cannot share elsewhere. Others turn to long walks, letting fresh air carry fragments of sorrow into distance. Some lean into colleagues, bound by shared understanding no one else could easily grasp. And in this companionship grows resilience, as they realize that the burden is never borne alone. In unity they find balance, a reminder that while one person cannot absorb such grief, together teams can. Their relationship with the sky itself changes. To ordinary passengers, the sky may symbolize freedom, wonder, romance. To investigators, it also whispers of fragility, a reminder that beauty exists side by side with risk. When investigators board planes themselves, they feel the engines hum with knowledge gained from accidents past. They place their trust not blindly but knowingly, aware of every bolt and system and checklist born from tragedies they once studied. Paradoxically, this awareness brings them comfort, for they know more clearly than anyone else just how much has been learned, and how unlikely it is for lightning to strike in the same way again. Over time, this perspective instills serenity. Investigators recognize that aviation is not perfect, but it grows safer with every investigation. They see the arc of history bending toward safety, not by chance but by persistence. They see humanity's promise fulfilled, never to let loss pass without meaning. In this knowledge, they rest easier, even when burdened, because they understand the labor of their lives is not fruitless but fruitful in ways invisible yet tangible in every safe landing across the world. This invisible reward, the successful flight paths of strangers they will never meet, becomes their quiet satisfaction. No applause greets them, no headlines linger once findings are published. But when planes land safely millions of times, they know within themselves that these unremarked landings are the direct fruits of their patient labor. Every child carried home from a journey, every parent returning to embrace their families, every traveler stepping into a terminal without incident is, in a sense, their unspoken medal. The world moves safely, quietly, because they labored silently in grief, turning it into protection. The cycle never ends. New accidents occur, unexpected failures emerge, mysteries unfold. Each time investigators lift their burden again, stepping into wreckage or silence, knowing another journey of patience has begun. But far from despairing, they embrace this endlessness, because endlessness means continuity, and continuity means safety continues to grow. They are not dismayed by unending labor, they see in it the unending promise of flight itself. As long as humanity chooses the sky, investigators will be there, keeping watch, ensuring safety unfolds alongside progress. And through these quiet lives, through their balance of sorrow and resilience, aviation tells a story larger than tragedy. It tells the story of human beings willing to descend into pain so others may ascend into safety. It tells of devotion so steady it resembles prayer, though it is written not with words but with actions, not in sacred texts but in reports, recommendations, and improvements. It is a story with no end, because safety is never finished, it is always being woven, rewoven, thicker with each thread. So as we drift deeper into this narrative, as the night outside turns gentle and aircraft lights move like slow stars across the sky, remember the unseen figures awake within hangars, within laboratories, within meeting rooms. Remember that their hearts beat with the memory of those who flew and did not return, and that in turning such memory into protection they guard all who still lift into the air. In their patience, the air itself becomes a safer cradle, carrying millions across continents as though wrapped in invisible wings of resilience. That is their gift, and their burden, and their promise, one fulfilled in silence, one sustained across all skies, one you live within each time you close your eyes and trust the journey above. In the flow of time, once investigators have finished shaping their findings, once manufacturers have revised designs and airlines have reshaped training programs, the story does not end. It does not vanish into archives or fade into the memory of one moment. Instead, it pushes outward, radiating far beyond laboratories and aviation offices, flowing gently yet steadily through cultures, governments, and even the subconscious of ordinary travelers who may not know how deeply they are touched by these lessons. This ripple effect is perhaps the most extraordinary part of aviation's hidden narrative, the way every investigation quietly alters not only airplanes themselves but the collective human understanding of flight, safety, and trust. At first, the changes appear invisible. There is no announcement made to the millions of passengers boarding flights every day. No loud reminder is given that a safety briefing, a reinforced door, or a fleeting adjustment to a display screen was born from tragedy. Instead, the changes arrive subtly, woven into the experience of travel so seamlessly that passengers think of them not as innovations but as natural parts of flying. Yet behind each detail, each instruction, each safeguard lies a story, a lesson harvested painfully from an accident once suffered by others. As this process repeats over decades, nations themselves begin to embody these lessons. Governments learn that transparency in investigations ensures credibility, and credibility breeds confidence. The sharing of information across borders becomes a standard, because aviation itself ignores boundaries. What one nation learns from sorrow becomes a safeguard for every other nation. The ripple grows global. A crash in one part of the world produces design changes carried into every cockpit worldwide, regardless of whether passengers speak the same language or live in the same culture. And slowly, without fanfare, humanity stitches a common fabric of protection, a collective armor woven from shared experiences of loss reshaped into progress. This global culture of safety does not form easily. It is born from debates, disagreements, competing interests. Manufacturers often resist, regulators often push, airlines balance cost against improvement. But the persistence of investigators, and the weight carried by reports that cannot be ignored, gradually overcome resistance. In the quiet persistence of data, the patient presentation of truth, every objection meets the undeniable reality of evidence. And in time, new laws pass, new technologies appear, new training procedures are written. The negotiations fade, but the results endure. Safety grows, not through perfection, but through the discipline of returning again and again to learn, to adapt, to share. Even ordinary people who never step inside a cockpit carry fragments of these cultural lessons. Parents teaching children to respect flight attendants during briefings, travelers remembering to tighten seatbelts when turbulence warning signs illuminate, passengers glancing calmly at exits before takeoff. All these small habits originate in the ripples of investigations past. Though most have forgotten which tragedy prompted which regulation, the memory is embedded in behavior. This invisible inheritance binds together strangers who may never speak to one another, filling cabins with unspoken cooperation. Passengers trust the system because culturally, over years of repeated safety, faith takes root. This trust itself is a collective memory, shaped by investigators who turned disasters into lessons generations ago. Through this cycle, aviation becomes not only an industry but a global language of resilience. Each investigation adds new grammar, new vocabulary, expanding the shared lexicon of how to keep humans safe in the sky. Engineers, pilots, regulators, cabin crews, and passengers all learn some part of this language, even if only subconsciously. And so when a passenger leans back in the dim cabin light, eyes closing as engines hum steadily, they are held by a language they may not speak but which speaks for them, a language teaching safety into reality, line by line, law by law, lesson by lesson. If one listens deeply, this global consciousness becomes a kind of collective dream. It is a dream that humans shall cross the skies not in fear but in confidence. That dream requires labor in silence, caretakers of the dream working unseen. Investigators embody this role not only for themselves but for everyone, because their search for answers cultivates a culture of calm repeated endlessly across borders. Nations at odds in politics cooperate here, because the air shared by humanity demands it. Engineers of competing companies share findings, because a defect discovered in one wing might exist in another. And when one tragedy erupts, the world unites to examine, to learn, to guard the future. This cooperation forms one of the quiet triumphs of humanity. At ground level, where conflict often dominates, differences may seem insurmountable. But in the sky, safety demands unity so strong it overcomes rivalry. Investigations become bridges across nations, binding investigators from different cultures in the same commitment. And thus, international teams walk crash sites, read data together, and listen side by side to voices of final cockpits. Language barriers fall silent beneath the clarity of evidence. Human beings connect not as representatives of rivals but as protectors standing together under one sky. Even in the everyday life of passengers, cultural shifts appear. Airports now emphasize organized boarding, clear security, emergency readiness. Families discuss the miracle of travel with less fear, comforted subconsciously by decades of incident-free journeys. The very framing of aviation in cultural imagination moves from awe and apprehension toward quiet confidence. Films, literature, stories of flight slowly transition too, from tales of vulnerability toward stories of wonder mixed with safety. And beneath these cultural expressions, the invisible foundation remains: investigations, patient and steady. Indeed, at the deepest level, even those lying half asleep on red-eye flights, lulled by the steady whir of engines, are participants in this global transformation. They may never know which investigation ensured they arrived safely, which nameless investigator's long nights of data analysis shielded them, which laboratory chart far away allowed their journey to remain uneventful. But they carry the fruits nonetheless. They live the results invisibly, and these results allow them to sleep in seats 30,000 feet above oceans with calm hearts. That calmness is the cultural inheritance investigators labored to provide. To see aviation in this way is to see it as more than technology. It becomes civilization's shared vow, never to abandon truth, never to waste sorrow, always to guard what is learned. This vow stretches across time, linking one generation to another. The tragedies of the past live within the safety of the present, and the vigilance of the present prepares protection for the future. In this vow, humanity demonstrates resilience at its purest, not denying failure but embracing it as a teacher more valuable than pride. When we step back, the scale of this culture is breathtaking. Imagine the millions of flights departing and arriving each day, the countless passengers boarding without fear, the intricate choreography of controllers, ground staff, pilots, and crews performing routines refined through decades of investigation. It is a civilization-wide ritual of trust repeated daily across continents. Within this ballet, every gesture, every checklist, every little rule carries the DNA of lessons harvested from disasters. And yet passengers smile distracted by destinations, unaware of the grand cultural inheritance that makes this ordinariness possible. For investigators, this unseen cultural effect is their deepest satisfaction. They need no celebration, because they see evidence of their work in the casual calm that pervades travel. They see parents resting easily beside children. They see business travelers working calmly mid-air, students laughing quietly across rows, elders sleeping without worry. Each unconscious gesture of trust, each peaceful moment on board is proof that their labor reached beyond labs and into culture itself. In these moments, they see the world transformed not through speeches but through behavior, not through monuments but through everyday choices shaped by invisible safety. The echo then becomes infinite, from accident to investigation, from investigation to culture, from culture to safety, from safety into trust. The world moves round in this circle endlessly, sustained by human persistence. And this circle deepens the narrative for listeners drifting into sleep with this story, because it reveals that behind every soft whisper of turbulence or reassuring announcement of descent lies a hidden web of lives dedicated to ensuring that calmness remains forever possible. As night stretches and flights move across the darkened sky, streams of aircraft resembling constellations drift unseen to most eyes. Yet those awake within them live inside this culture of safety, a culture crafted quietly by investigators, strengthened by nations, embodied by passengers. Every smooth landing becomes part of this shared dream humanity builds together. Every takeoff sustained by engines whispering steadily is a reminder that we are cared for not only by pilots and crews, but by generations who transformed loss into safety, who never cease to learn. And so, as the story continues, it does not race toward an end. It lingers, long and patient, stretching into the skies above us. It teaches us that aviation safety is not a fixed achievement but a living journey. It invites us to see investigators not as isolated figures locked within laboratories, but as threads woven into the larger fabric of global culture. It reminds us that when we close our eyes on flights, or listen in our sleep to this story, we rest upon an invisible foundation made of millions of hours, countless lives, infinite care. And though we do not see the investigators, though we do not hear their names spoken often, their presence surrounds us in gentle silence, guiding humanity's journey across the clouds with steady hands that never let the lessons of the sky be forgotten. As aviation advances, as the machines that carry humanity through the sky grow ever more sophisticated, as networks of satellites, algorithms, and supercomputers watch silently above and within, the work of investigators also evolves. Their role is not frozen in time, not limited to the aircraft of today. Just as steel wings once replaced wooden frames, just as jet engines replaced propellers, so too will investigation move forward into dimensions that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. And yet, even with all the new tools, even with oceans of data streaming through futuristic sensors, the heart of their work will remain the same: to seek truth with patience, to listen to silence, and to transform sorrow into safety. Already, the seeds of this transformation are visible. The aircraft of tomorrow do not simply fly, they communicate endlessly. Sensors capture vibrations so slight they are invisible to the eye, record temperatures, monitor pressure, and stream information in real time across continents. Flight recorders, once limited to boxes retrieved painfully from wreckage, now send messages instant by instant, ensuring that investigators, when faced with disaster, will not need to reconstruct from fragments alone. Yet this abundance of information, though a gift, also becomes a challenge. Where once investigators grappled with hundreds of parameters, they now confront millions. The human mind, steady though it may be, cannot parse every stream alone. And so investigators lean increasingly on artificial intelligence, on algorithms that sift, trace, and highlight anomalies across oceans of numbers. But even here, the essence remains human. Computers may reveal patterns, yet it is investigators who provide context, who ask the deeper questions, who sense from tone or silence what machines cannot feel. A string of data may mark a fault, yet only human intuition, sharpened across years of listening, can discern whether that fault was the culprit or merely a symptom. Technology may reshape the method of inquiry, but the rhythm of patience, humility, and empathy remains the core. Behind every algorithm still lies the investigator, guiding its search, interpreting its findings, ensuring the future does not lose sight of the human heart at the center of flight. As aviation stretches toward the edges of atmosphere, this role deepens further. Machines now rise not only above clouds but toward the boundaries of space. Suborbital journeys, rockets returning to Earth, spacecraft designed to carry passengers beyond planetary skies, all these usher a future where investigation must follow across new frontiers. When accidents occur beyond the familiar altitudes, when wreckage falls not into fields but into oceans or deserts after burning through atmosphere, the silence investigators face will be deeper than ever. Yet even in this silence, they will listen. Already, new designs for recorders and vision survival through fiery re-entries, new tracking systems record the heartbeat of spacecraft as they arc beyond orbit. And just as investigators once mastered twisted fragments of early aviation, they will master these, ensuring that humanity's reach toward the stars carries safety as faithfully as it carries wonder. This forward journey, however, is not only about machines. It is also about culture. As people grow used to traveling across the globe in hours, and one day perhaps across planets in days, the trust they place in invisible systems must grow equally strong. Investigators will remain the unseen bridge between that trust and reality, ensuring that every leap into technology is anchored in accountability. Their reports, though perhaps filled with equations of orbital mechanics or analyses of solar radiation, will still say the same essential thing: we will never stop learning, never stop guarding, never stop listening. In this vision of the future, one can almost imagine hangars transformed into data halls, filled not with lined wreckage but with three-dimensional holograms of aircraft reconstructed from billions of transmitted signals. Teams will walk not among metal fragments but among glowing projections, each fracture mapped digitally, each system's performance replayed in immersive clarity. They will listen not only to cockpit voices but perhaps to biometric rhythms of crews, monitoring heartbeats and stress rises in real time. And yet, despite the futuristic stage, the echoes will feel familiar, voices remembered, lessons distilled, grief honored, safety advanced. The tools may change, but the calling is eternal. As humanity moves toward an age of autonomy, with aircraft and spacecraft increasingly guided by artificial intelligence, investigators will inherit questions of responsibility unlike any before. When no human hand directly causes an error, the search for cause shifts into the ethereal realm of code and programming. Lines of logic embedded in algorithms, choices made in simulations months prior, become the focus of scrutiny. Investigators of the future will not only read twisted metal and burned wires, they will read code bases and simulations, replaying decisions made by machines. And yet here too, the core remains: discover what failed, reveal why, and ensure it cannot fail again. Even in autonomy, accountability persists. carried forward by human hands devoted to translation between disaster and prevention. In the imagination, one may consider the silence of an orbital mishap, a spacecraft vanishing beyond radar, families looking skyward unsure of what occurred. Investigators will respond, piecing together telemetry, fragments re-entered from space, simulations of cosmic forces unseen. They will tread into realms of radiation bursts, solar storms, micrometeors, factors alien to traditional aviation, yet they will approach each with the same humility and care. Their patience will reach beyond Earth, but their values will remain anchored. They will become detectives not only of the skies, but of the void beyond, listeners to the silence of space itself. All of this forward movement carries implications for ordinary life, too. As aviation systems become more complex, the reassurance investigators provide becomes more valuable. Passengers of the future will understand even less of the systems that carry them, yet will trust even more. That trust will rest, as it always has, on the invisible promise that when failure occurs, someone will find the cause and ensure it is not repeated. This promise remains immutable, binding the experience of a farmer boarding a small domestic plane today to that of a traveler boarding a transorbital liner centuries from now. The bridge remains invisible, but it is real, and it is built by steady human devotion that refuses to let silence remain unexplained. Even in this futuristic landscape, investigators themselves will not escape the emotional lives their predecessors knew. They will still walk into spaces where objects remind them of absence, whether fragments of shattered drones, debris from orbital panels, or digital recordings of voices stilled by sudden calamity. They will still meet families yearning for clarity, their tears timeless whether shed in an airport terminal or under the glow of spaceports. They will still balance sorrow with patience, allowing grief to become not paralysis but purpose. No matter how technology evolves, the human heart remains at the center, and investigators will always tend that heart, ensuring it beats within the rhythm of safety. The cultural ripple of such work in the future will extend farther still. Just as investigations today form a global language of safety, tomorrow they may become a planetary language, uniting nations not only under one sky but across multiple skies. Shared databases, collective protections, universal protocols all born from disasters survived and remembered create an ethic of guardianship that reaches into the stars. One can imagine humanity gathering not just as nations bound by treaties but as a species bound by safety, carrying lessons into every journey, no matter how far from Earth it travels. So as we follow this thread forward, drifting into the vision of what lies ahead, one truth continues quietly. Whether carried out with microscopes and fragments or with holograms and AI projections, investigation remains the same sacred act. It is the transformation of sorrow into future safety. It is humanity's refusal to let loss become meaningless. It is patience extended into eternity, ensuring that every journey into air, sky, or space is covered by invisible hands of guardianship. This is the future memory forming already, this is the silent work ensuring that no matter how high we reach, we remain watched over by those who listen deeply, learn deeply, and never let silence remain unanswered. Thus, as the night flows on and engines hum across the sky, as soft cabin lights warm the spaces where passengers sleep dreaming, the invisible bridge continues. It stretches not only backward into history but forward into destinies yet unflown. Every safe descent tomorrow, every flare of nose lifting above runway asphalt, every whisper of wheels touching ground without harm will stand as testimony to this bridge. It is the eternal gift of investigators, carried quietly from past into present, from present into futures across horizons, and perhaps one day, into the infinite vastness beyond the clouds. When night falls across the continents, and the skies fill with the silver arcs of aircraft gliding silently along their routes, there is something almost dreamlike in the rhythm of this movement. Millions sleep as they travel, eyes closed against the gentle hum of engines, unaware of the infinite tapestry of vigilance stretched beneath them. Each aircraft, from the smallest regional flight to the largest intercontinental giant, rests upon invisible pillars of lessons learned, investigations carried out, promises fulfilled. And within the quiet flow of these journeys, we can trace the enduring story. Every safe passage is not just the result of design and training, but of a greater guardianship, a guardianship born from the patience and persistence of those who refuse to let silence remain unexplained. The beauty of this guardianship unfolds most clearly at night, when the world below rests. From high above, cities glow faintly, scattered like constellations reversed upon the earth. Oceans stretch black and immense, broken only by the faint shimmer of moonlight. In these spaces of stillness, travelers sink into sleep, and with them enters the soft recognition that they are carried not only by engines, but by memory, the memory of tragedies past, reshaped painstakingly into the safety of the present. To sense this is to feel a kind of sacred hush surrounding every flight, an atmosphere in which sorrow has been transmuted into protection. For as long as humanity takes to the air, investigators form the invisible choir accompanying that journey. They do not sing with voices, but with actions, reports written in calm prose, tests run under fluorescent hours, fragments placed like puzzle pieces into reconstructions. Their music is patience, their verses are lessons preserved across decades of work. And so long as their song persists, it carries humanity forward with assurance, ensuring that each night sky overflows not merely with movements of machines, but with the resonance of lives devoted to discovering truth. Consider the ocean crossings, those endless flights carried across hours of darkness, where passengers drift deeply, sensing nothing of the intricacies commanding their safety. Beneath the wings, hidden currents of air flow suddenly or smoothly, sometimes demanding adjustments from the craft. Yet the pilot's decisions, and the systems supporting them, are not born of chance. They trace their ancestry to accidents studied long ago, incidents recorded, voices replayed, components tested, hypotheses debated until clarity emerged. Each decision carried out in the cockpit tonight is the living descendant of hundreds of past lessons harvested gently by investigators attentive enough to listen to wreckage. Though passengers may never know the names of those accidents, they live inside the protection they offered. As the night deepens, the story of aviation itself begins to resemble an endless river, a river of air carrying wings across generations. Downstream flows every new innovation, while upstream lie the storms and failures that made progress essential. At the river's bank sit investigators, guardians who dip their hands into the current, sensing through ripples when something went wrong, pulling causes from depths so the flow may continue unbroken. They are watchers of this river, ensuring it carries travelers safely across unseen distances, ensuring its currents never again conceal hidden dangers unlearned. In this form of guardianship there is humility. Most passengers never think of investigations as they close their eyes and breathe steadily against the hum of engines. They think of destinations, of friends waiting, of mornings to come after sleep. And this is as it should be. The greatest gift of investigators is precisely this forgetfulness, this unawareness, because it means safety has become so normal, so reliable, it no longer requires fear. Their work becomes invisible by design. It asks for no gratitude, only the peace of mind able to dream mid-journey without a second thought. Investigators themselves know the paradox of their role. To succeed is to remain unseen, to ensure that others live unaware of the risks once endured. When flights happen safely, their work achieves its purpose by vanishing from conversation. And yet they carry within them every story of loss, remembering flights the world has forgotten. They recall their voices, their moments of confusion, their final seconds captured in data. These memories live inside them quietly, held with reverence, not as weights but as lanterns. In each future decision that saves lives, those memories resurface, guiding understanding, shaping improvements. They do not vanish, they are preserved in silence. As dawn approaches and light filters once more into cabins, investigators' legacy remains constant. Every sunrise above the horizon reminds humanity that even in the face of tragedy, there is resilience. Each soft descent into airports scattered across the earth, with wheels meeting runways and reverse thrust echoing like a sigh of relief, becomes a ritual of continuity. Hidden inside the ritual lies an echo of investigators' steady work. What once was loss becomes routine safety, what once was mystery becomes routine truth. And in this endless transformation, the world does not collapse under the weight of disasters. Instead, it rises, always safer, always wiser, always moving toward horizons still to come. The timelessness of this rhythm tells us something about ourselves. It reveals that human beings, though frail in the face of catastrophe, are also tireless in seeking meaning. Investigators embody this resilience most purely, because they are asked to enter sorrow and emerge from it with knowledge. They show that no matter how strong the silence, it can be questioned, and no matter how deep the grief, something can be carried forward as protection. This principle is larger than aviation. It illustrates humanity's broader promise, to learn from every fall, to transform setbacks into lessons, to honor the past as a foundation for safer futures. In truth, investigations become a kind of collective memory stretching across generations. Children born decades after an accident still live within the protection crafted from it. Entire families build their everyday lives upon flights safeguarded by tragedies they never knew. And in this way, disasters once remembered with pain dissolve into broader legacies of safety. The tragedy itself fades from headlines, but its essence remains, quietly protecting strangers far removed from the day it occurred. Investigators live as caretakers of this memory, ensuring it never fades into nothingness, ensuring it always blossoms as protection. And there is something meditative in imagining this process repeating without end. Night after night, investigators somewhere in the world bend over pages, or listen through headphones, or examine fragments beneath magnification, even as countless aircraft drift calmly across the sky above them. Their work never pauses, and because of that, flight itself never ceases. Humanity continues to traverse oceans, continues to step confidently into cabins, continues to live as if the sky had always been safe. This continuity is fragile, yet it endures because of those who never rest in pursuit of explanation. So it is, when we close our eyes and let voices guide us into this narrative, that the story of aviation investigation becomes something soothing, something eternal. Its details may be technical, its process is meticulous, but its arc is profoundly gentle, from loss into safety, from grief into guardianship, from silence into trust. Listening to it through the haze of sleep, one discovers within it the rhythm of a lullaby, not sung but lived, not carried by melody but by patience. A lullaby that promises every flight we take is protected not only by wings overhead, but by stories and lessons guarded faithfully by those unseen. And in this lullaby-like flow, the world slows, thoughts drift, and the listener enters into the very atmosphere investigators create, an atmosphere of calm security, where dangers have been heard, where mysteries have been solved, where the future is cushioned softly by the persistence of human care. This is where the story brings us into a realization that above the stillness of night, woven into every safe journey, lies a gentle hand ensuring we may fall asleep without fear, carried quietly across the clouds into tomorrow. When a story comes to its end, there is often a moment of silence, a soft exhale, a recognition that what has been told carries weight beyond words. As we draw toward the conclusion of this long journey, carried through fragments and wreckage, through patience and discovery, through sorrow and transformation, we find ourselves standing at the threshold where memory meets trust. What began as broken wings and unanswered questions becomes a legacy of guardianship silently woven into the safety of today. And as you listen here, in the quiet of the night, you are part of that legacy, drifting in the calm that investigators devoted their lives to providing. Think back over what has unfolded. From the first pieces of debris encountered in silence, through the careful cataloging of fragments, the recovery of voices from within flight recorders, the patient study of data, and the long months stretched into years of investigation, we have walked the path of those who devote themselves to finding truth in the most difficult of places. We have seen their work ripple outward into manufacturers' redesigns, airlines' new training, regulators' policies, and the cultural memory that gradually anchors the trust passengers carry each time they sit within an aircraft. We have followed their path as it stretched beyond Earth, into visions of autonomous flights and future spacecraft, and we have seen how their patience and humility remain timeless, unchanged in essence across every generation. Their task, repeated endlessly, is to transform sorrow into protection. This is the rhythm we have traced together. Accident leads to investigation, investigation leads to discovery, discovery to recommendations, recommendations to safety. From pain, protection emerges. From grief, trust is born. It is a rhythm as steady as breath, and it is the breath upon which modern flight depends. And to recognize it is to relax into the understanding that humanity has chosen not ignorance, but vigilant listening, not despair, but persistence. Each investigator, anonymous though they may be, emerges in this story as a quiet guardian of the sky. Not one of them seeks recognition, yet each of them carries memories of tragedies that can never fully recede. They remember the silent fields, the lost voices, the sorrow of families waiting for answers long after the rest of the world has moved on. And yet, rather than faltering under such weight, they use it, shaping sorrow into tools and truths that protect others. Their legacy is invisible, but real. It lies in every reinforced door, every improved display, every revised policy, every safe flight that touches down without incident. This invisible gift, this guardianship, belongs not only to aviators or engineers. It belongs to everyone who travels. When passengers step onto aircraft today, they carry with them the weight of history already transformed into safety. They are watched over by silent lessons harvested year after year. They are comforted by the invisible arms of knowledge passed onward through generations of truth seekers. They may never know the details of crashes that made their flights safer. They may never read investigation reports. But within every smooth descent at sunrise, every calm crossing at night, the gift of those investigators endures, surrounding them quietly, invisibly, completely. If you were to look at the night sky now, dark, endless, sprinkled with stars, you would know that thousands of aircraft move invisibly across it. They drift calmly above oceans, mountains, cities, continents. Within them are millions of people, some awake, some sleeping, some dreaming. Each one is held in the same safety net we have explored together. Above them hums an inheritance of resilience and patience, a promise kept alive across decades. And down here, as you listen, you too are part of this quiet lineage, this story stretching through time and across all skies. There is something deeply reassuring in realizing how humanity has chosen to treat its disasters. Instead of allowing accidents to remain as failures, we have chosen to carve from them knowledge. Instead of permitting sorrow to linger as emptiness, we have transformed it into protection. This is not only an aviation story. It is a human story, one that tells us about who we are when faced with tragedy. We are not only mourners, we are learners. We are not only victims of loss, we are preservers of meaning. This is the story investigators repeat endlessly, each one embodying the human vow that no silence remains unexplored, no loss left without legacy. As the documentary closes, imagine the world as it is now. Imagine the night stretching softly across the earth, aircraft moving like distant lanterns across the sky. Imagine investigators still awake somewhere, perhaps bending over data, listening to recordings, discussing quietly, writing carefully. Imagine passengers above, sleeping unaware, carried safely because of the tireless labor of those they do not know. Imagine families at home, trusting in tomorrow's flights because of yesterday's lessons. This is the quiet paradox of flight. Though the sky seems vast and fragile, it is safer today than it has ever been, and safer still it will become, because human beings refuse to ignore truth. If you close your eyes now, you can feel yourself part of this rhythm, resting within the same safety net. You can let the hum of words and the story's flow become as steady as engines whispering through the atmosphere. You can imagine investigators placing their hands quietly on shattered fragments, promising silently to carry lessons forward, and you can feel those promises surrounding you, even now, wherever you are, whispering softly that the skies above the earth are cared for deeply, and you are part of that care. And so, as we come to the final words, let us pause in gratitude. Gratitude not only for investigators themselves, but for the broader truth they represent, that humanity, in its frailty, still chooses resilience, that in its grief, it still seeks meaning, and that in its mistakes, it still insists on learning. This gratitude is the right conclusion, because it reminds us that while stories of aviation disasters begin with loss, they end with protection. They end with continuity. They end with life carried forward in gentle safety. To you, my listener, resting now, drifting on the edge of sleep or within its calm embrace, I give you this final comfort. You are carried within that guardianship. You are held by the lessons of the past, gently supporting the present. You may travel, you may dream, you may journey through night skies aboard aircraft traced like stars, and through all of it you are accompanied by unseen yet devoted guardians. They do not ask you to notice them. They only ask you to trust, and in that trust is calmness enough to sleep. Thank you for joining me through this story, for walking patiently down the long, winding path of tragedy turned into protection, for letting your mind and heart settle into the gentle rhythm of investigation. May you carry within you the comfort that above us, and around us, the sky is filled not only with flight, but with care, with steady listening, with the persistent guardianship of investigators who transform silence into safety. And now, as we close, I wish you rest, peace, and gentle dreams. May your sleep be calm, may your journeys be safe, and may you remember, even faintly, that you are watched over by invisible guardians who will never stop listening, never stop learning, and never stop protecting. Good night, dear listeners. Sleep peacefully.